His article on the MMQB.com is entitled "A New Witness, a Strange Voicemail, and More Revelations into the Peyton Manning-Jamie Norwright Saga." He is Robert Klemko here on The Rich Eisen Show. How are you, Robert?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing fine. Thanks for calling into the show. I appreciate it. You have the floor. Let folks know who may not have read your article or might be interested in seeking it out. What is the new revelation that you were able to uncover?
Sure. Well, we sought out after this issue was kind of resurrected with the 74-page document re-released by Sean King with the New York Daily News a few weeks ago. We sought out to do some reporting on it and reach out to a bunch of the people that were named in it and a bunch of people that were not named in it that were, employed or student employees with the training program in '96, the year Peyton Manning allegedly, according to Dr. Jamie Norwright, sexually assaulted her in the training room at the University of Tennessee. And over the course of reporting, we were put in touch with a guy, a former teammate of Manning, an ex-roommate of Manning, who had lost touch with him over the years, who was in the Marine Corps for a very long time and is now a police officer, who said he was in the room. Previously, the only records, the only affidavits and witness testimony that we had were from Peyton Manning, Jamie Norwright, and Malcolm Saxon, the track and field athlete who says he lost his eligibility over the suggestion that Peyton did something inappropriate. So this new witness, was willing to go on the record and told us that there had been nothing more than a mooning. And then over the course of the reporting, we talked to a bunch of people that had dealt with Norwright and could kind of speak to her as a professional and her personally. And we discovered a number of voicemails that appeared to be from her, one that was left on the Manning family home phone at Archie and Olivia's home that was lewd and suggested all kinds of disparaging things about the Manning family that were of a sexual nature. And we also had a conversation with Jamie that was off the record where I was able to present her with each of the things that all the things people were saying about her in the story, and she declined comment, unfortunately.
So you did speak with her?
Yes. Went down to Lakeland, Florida, where she now lives, where she works in yoga and also as an employee at Florida Southern College, and knocked on her door and texted her, and she reached out, and her and I were able to go over everything that was going to be in the story. And she declined to comment, but, she had a lot of other things to say.
Well, Robert Klemko's here. I've got a few questions about this. Let's start with Greg Johnson, who is the football player and college roommate of Manning's, who has come forward to back up the narrative of a mooning or a description of a mooning, giving us now two he-saids with him and Peyton and a she-said with Jamie Norwright and a he-said in a way with Malcolm Saxon, the cross-country runner, whose letter was I guess, involved in the case that in 2003 that came out in that 74-page document telling Manning, you might as well admit to what happened and maintain some dignity. Johnson, where has he been this whole time, Robert?
So to begin with, it's important to remember that Johnson writes this letter and signs an affidavit, but he's never deposed. He's never sworn under oath. He's never interrogated by the Manning lawyers. He's never questioned by the Norwright lawyers, which is frankly very weird. In the affidavit, he discussed this incident, said that there was an inappropriate exposure, but never mentioned physical contact. Physical contact doesn't come up either in Jamie Norwright's initial lawsuit, sexual harassment suit against the University of Tennessee. Malcolm Saxon says in the letter that he lost his eligibility on the cross-country team after reporting this incident the way that he did. And he went on to graduate with a degree in finance, and at some point he moved to Jackson, Mississippi, which is where we started our reporting, and became a school teacher. And, he's married with kids, and we spoke briefly at his doorstep the first day that I was, assigned to this story. I think that was last Tuesday. And he, essentially said he didn't have any comment. He didn't want to jump back into this controversy.
This is Saxon you're talking
Yes.
about. But with Johnson, as you say in the piece, and as you mentioned about a moment ago, you were put in touch with him through Manning's representatives, is what you say in the piece. And that is something that a lot of people have pointed out, Robert, is to say, how is this not Manning trying to serve up to you and the MMQB something that is exculpatory in this this whole saga, Robert?
Right. That is a completely fair question. And, we had a lot of discussions about whether or not we should print what Johnson had to say. There were a few things that, his story satisfied. Yes, he was put in touch with us by the Mannings after reaching out to them when the story came back up and saying to them, I'm willing to speak with a reporter off the record. So we talked on the pretense that I wouldn't quote him and I wouldn't use anything that he said. And over the course of about 4 days, I was able to convince him to go on the record. He's a police officer who does occasional undercover work, and he was very worried about his identity being released. So the other thing that we asked him that we were very skeptical about is why didn't this come back up in 2003 when the civil suit was filed by Nauwright against Manning after his book, Manning, discussed her as, being vulgar mouth and saying that it was only a mooning. And, it later came out of depositions that the Mannings thought very ill of this woman and suggested to the biographer that she had had inappropriate relationships with black student athletes. Why didn't Greg Johnson then come out and say, here's what actually happened? So Greg was a Marine immediately after he graduated from the University of Tennessee, and for most of 2003, he was participating in the invasion of Iraq. There's a book written by a former Tennessee athletics staffer that goes into his participation in the rescue of Jessica Sweet, the American POW.
Jessica Lynch, yeah.
Jessica Lynch. So we were able to verify that he did participate in the invasion of Iraq. Says he didn't have an email address, says he didn't keep in touch with Peyton. He came home during 2003 for a number of days and got married, but he had no contact. And he says he had to remind Peyton a decade later, yeah, you remember, I was there. I talked to administration about this thing, and I'm willing to talk about it now off the record with people if you want. So Peyton at no point reached out to this guy and said, what's the deal? Because Johnson thinks he doesn't remember. Unfortunately, we were not able to get Peyton on the record to confirm that, he didn't remember that Johnson was a part of this whole thing in 1996.
Robert Klemko of the MMQB joining me here on the Rich Eisen Show. Well, why wouldn't Nauwright comment to you? This is a thing that doesn't make sense, too, because from what you even point out with these voicemails, there's been articles written in Knoxville that she reportedly is calling the phone lines there, burning them up, saying that the story has been unreported. And now here you are showing up to report on it. Why? How do we square this circle, Robert?
Well, she thinks that the media at this point is so slanted that she's not going to get a fair shake. And what she's been telling everybody is that she's so fed up that she's going to release, quote, all the documents, unquote. And these are pertaining to Peyton Manning's time at Tennessee. She promised the same to a news organization that I talk about in the story. But she never delivers on that promise. And to me, it seemed like she just didn't believe that we were going to handle the story the right way. So to her, she felt like there was no incentive to then talk. You also have this non-disclosure agreement that she would then have to violate to comment on the specifics of what happened in 1996.
Interesting. So what do you make of all this? If you could play analyst based on your own reporting, Robert, not to put you in an uncomfortable spot, but you've talked with you seem to have talked to virtually everybody, with the exception of Peyton himself. What do you make of all this, Robert?
Well, it's hard to say because I think we went into this story with the idea that we were going to get people who were in the orbit of this story or directly connected to the story to go on the record. And that was an extremely difficult thing to do because nobody wants to get dragged into a legal battle on this thing 20 years later. So I may have talked to 35, 40 people, and we quote 7 or 8 people in the story. To me, I think that with a lot of these cases, you have one side saying one extreme happened, you have one side saying another extreme happened, and then the truth is somewhere in the middle. I can't speak to exactly what happened in February 29th, 1996. There are at least 4 people in the room who know that, and they're almost all saying something different. So I don't really want to get into what I believe happened.
Okay. Robert, thanks for the call. I appreciate it. We'll have you back on for your next piece. Okay?
And thanks a lot, Rich.
You bet. That's Robert Klemko, at Robert Klemko on Twitter.
The Rich Eisen Show, weekdays at noon Eastern. On Audience.